September 12, 1945, Fort Sam Houston, Texas. The war was over. But inside the repatriation hall, another battle was unfolding, silent, tense, and entirely unexpected. Dozens of Japanese women sat at long wooden tables, staring at plates of steaming beef they refused to touch. Not one bite, not one hand lifted a fork. To the American officers watching, it looked like defiance. To the women, it felt like betrayal. To eat the one meat their traditions had taught them never to touch, especially in the land of their conquerors. No one in the room realized that within days, these same starving women would wipe tears from their eyes as they tasted something they believed impossible. American beef they not only accepted, but loved. And the reason, a single Texas dish so transformed, so smoky, so unrecognizable that it shattered cultural rules, eased the weight of defeat, and turned strangers into people again. September 1945. The war had ended, but Fort Sam Houston in Texas still felt like a crossroads between two worlds that didn't know how to speak to each other. The sun hung low and heavy, turning the repatriation center into a haze of heat and dust as a transport truck rolled through the gates. Inside sat 5 Japanese women: Eiko Mori, Hana Sato, Reiko Minami, Yumi Okada, and Mina Fujimoto, civilian POWs who had survived island bombings, starvation, and years of uncertainty. They carried no suitcases, only fragments of memories sealed into the silence between them. When they entered the Masole for their first meal in America, the aroma of roasted beef drifted toward them. Plates were prepared, forks were set, steam curled in the warm air. But the women didn't touch a single bite. Their hands stayed folded in their laps. Their eyes dropped to the table. The refusal confused the Americans and puzzled even the women themselves. They had survived everything war could throw at them. But a plate of beef, that, somehow, was a boundary they could not cross. Before we dive deeper into this unbelievable true story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps keep forgotten histories alive. The first morning inside Fort Sam Houston began with a stillness that felt unnatural to Eiko Mori. After years of waking to air raid sirens, barked commands, and jungle humidity thick enough to swallow breath, the calm Texas dawn felt impossible. Sunlight drifted through the barracks windows like liquid gold, warming the wooden floors where the women sat quietly dressing in the plain cotton clothing they'd been issued the night before. Eiko tugged the hem of her sleeve, testing the fabric between her fingers. It was coarse but clean, unfamiliar but safe. Safety, she reminded herself, was a blessing she still didn't know how to trust. Outside, the scent of dust and oak smoke lingered in the air, a smell foreign to every woman in the group. Reiko Minami stepped out first, her posture elegant despite the weight she carried from 3 years spent in an Australian internment camp. Hana Sato followed, shoulders tense, scanning the horizon the way civilians learn to do when war teaches them to expect danger from any direction. Yumi Okada lingered behind, soft-voiced and timid, clutching a folded photograph of her younger brother. Mina Fujimoto walked last, her chin slightly raised, not out of defiance, but because pride was the only possession she still owned. The American corporal escorting them didn't speak much Japanese, but he motioned toward the mess hall, tapping his wrist as if to say breakfast now. They walked in silence across the dusty courtyard, their thin shoes pressing faint footprints into the Texas dirt. Inside the mess hall, the smell hit them immediately. Rich, savory, heavy, the unmistakable aroma of beef. A steaming tray of sliced roast sat beneath warm lights, its juices pooling in the pan. Mashed potatoes, green beans, bread. None of these were alarming, but the beef stopped all 5 women mid-step. Eiko felt her stomach twist. Not from hunger, she'd lived with hunger long enough to ignore it, but from something deeper, something older. Japan had changed before the war, westernized, modernized, shifting its culture rapidly. But Eiko's family came from a rural region near Nara, where Buddhist influence still lingered in the way people cooked, spoke, even prayed. Eating beef wasn't forbidden by law, but it carried a weight, spiritual, symbolic, generational. Cows were helpers, laborers, companions in the fields. Only desperate or Western-influenced families ate them, and she was not desperate, not in that way. At the table, Grace Nakamura, the Japanese-American liaison, smiled gently. "Kudasai," she encouraged. "Please eat." But none of the women moved. Eiko folded her hands in her lap. Hana kept her gaze fixed on the wood grain of the table. Reiko whispered something under her breath, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a memory. Mina pressed her lips together in thin, pained defiance. Only Yumi allowed herself to glance at the beef, her face washing with guilt. Grace sighed and approached Captain Lewis Harding, who oversaw the repatriation center. His brow knit in confusion as she explained. They won't eat beef, she said. Cultural reasons. Religious influence. It's complicated. Lewis exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. We don't have endless options. Meat is. Meat. It's what we serve. Grace hesitated. She wanted to push back, wanted to remind him these women had already lost everything, that forcing their hand would solve nothing. But the American military was not built for nuance, not in 1945. Instead, she returned to the women and spoke softly, kneeling beside them. You're safe here, she whispered in Japanese. No one will punish you for refusing. I'll make sure you aren't hungry. But the women shook their heads. Hunger wasn't the enemy. Betraying their sense of self was. When lunch came, the same thing happened, and dinner, and again the next day. By the third morning, Aiko's hands trembled slightly as she walked. Yumi's cheeks were pale. Hannah's steps had slowed. They weren't starving, not yet, but the gap between meals and emotion had begun to carve itself deeper. Captain Harding called an emergency staff meeting. Grace took a breath. They don't refuse because they're stubborn. They refuse because everything familiar has been stripped away. This is their last boundary. Sergeant Dan Brooks, a tall Texan with a voice like gravel, sat up straighter. If it's just beefy, maybe we need to give it to em another way. Lewis frowned. Explain. Dan wiped his hand across his jaw. Back home, we cook beef so long and slow it don't even look like beef anymore. Smoke it 12 hours, slice it thin. They might not even recognize it. Grace's eyes widened. You mean Texas barbecue? Dan said simply. It was a gamble. A cultural experiment, a leap into unfamiliar territory for both sides. But for the first time since arriving, Aiko felt something like curiosity stir inside her chest. Smoke, slow cooking, transformation. Perhaps even food could be reborn after war. She didn't know it yet, but that idea would change everything. The next morning, the Texas sun rose hard and bright, painting long shadows across the repatriation center. The Japanese women walked into the mess hall quietly, their eyes lowered, their bodies stiff from another night on thin cots. Naomi walked slightly behind the others, her mind still replaying yesterday's humiliation, turning away from food placed in front of them. She had not meant disrespect. None of them had. But the sight of beef had struck something deep, instinctive, almost sacred, inside. The tables were set again with the same meal. Sliced roast beef, potatoes, green beans. The women stood in silence. Naomi's heart tightened. Another day of refusing food. Another day of being a burden. Grace Nakamura stepped toward them, her expression patient but slightly strained. Good morning, she said softly in Japanese. Please, eat, you need your strength. Kimiko bowed her head in apology. We are grateful, truly. But we cannot eat beef, Grace exhaled. Nodding, she didn't argue. Instead, she patted Naomi's arm gently and walked away. But Naomi could see the exhaustion in Grace's eyes. The Americans were trying, the women were trying, and yet the gulf between them still felt impossibly wide. Colonel Morrison watched from the corner of the mess hall. He wasn't angry, just puzzled. Feeding thousands of soldiers across the Pacific had been easier than this one room full of fragile, traumatized women. He turned to Sergeant Owen Hayes, who stood beside him with a clipboard. We need another solution. Morrison muttered. Hayes sighed. We're low on fish, sir, and chicken is being rationed. What about substitutions? Hayes gestured helplessly. Sir, this is the army. We don't substitute, we standardize. Morrison dragged a hand down his face. And if they starve? Hayes didn't answer. After lunch, Grace found Naomi sitting alone by the laundry tent, mending a ripped collar. The girl's movements were slow, careful, almost ritualistic. Grace sat beside her in the shade. You're from Eheim, right? Grace asked gently. Naomi nodded. Yes, from a small village near the mountains. My parents were from Kumamoto, Grace said softly. They taught me the old traditions, too, before America made us forget them. Naomi looked at her with curiosity. Then you understand. I do, Grace said. More than the colonel, more than the cooks. But you must understand something too. Her voice softened. Here in Texas, cows are not sacred work partners. They are food, culture. Naomi lowered her eyes. We were taught it was wrong. Naomi lowered her eyes. We were taught it was wrong. And you are not wrong, Grace said firmly. But your beliefs don't have to stay frozen. They can bend. They can adapt. Adapt, Naomi repeated, tasting the word. Grace stood. Give us time. We'll find something that honors your beliefs. When she returned to the kitchen, Sergeant Hayes was arguing with the cooks. "You can't just stop serving beef," one of them complained. "This is Texas. Beef is the menu." Hayes slammed the clipboard down. "Then we need another way to serve it. Something they might accept." From the doorway, Tucker, a tall, broad-shouldered Texan with sleeves rolled to his elbows, leaned against the wall. "I got an idea," he drawled. Grace turned to him. "Please tell me it's not another form of roast beef." "No, ma'am," Tucker said with a slow grin. "It's something the good Lord himself would approve of." Morrison raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" Tucker stepped forward. "Barbecue." The colonel frowned. "Sergeant, barbecue is beef." "No, sir," Tucker corrected. "Barbecue is barbecue. It's a whole ritual, a transformation. Smoke, wood, patience. You give a brisket 12 hours in the pit. It don't look like beef, don't taste like beef, don't feel like beef." Grace crossed her arms. "You think that'll work?" Tucker shrugged. "Ain't lying. Just presenting it the Texas way." Morrison stared at him. The idea was absurd, but it was also the first hopeful suggestion they'd had all week. "Fine," Morrison said at last. "Test it. Tomorrow morning." Tucker's grin widened. "I'll start the fire at 4 a.m. That evening, Naomi and the others gathered in their barracks, sharing weak tea and whispered fears. Kimiko sat on her cot, hands folded neatly. "Tomorrow," she said, "we may face the same food again." The women murmured anxiously. Naomi looked at her leaders, then at her own trembling hands. Grace said they will try something new. "New?" Leela asked skeptically. "Americans do not understand our ways. Maybe they are trying to," Naomi said quietly. Kimiko watched Naomi's face thoughtfully. "What do you hope for?" Naomi hesitated. "I hoped for a food that does not feel like betrayal." Silence fell. "Not sad, just honest." Kimiko nodded. "Then let us pray the Americans understand that, too." Outside, smoke began to rise from behind the mess hall, thin, blue, drifting into the night sky. But none of the women saw it. None of them knew that the smell of oak and firewood would soon challenge everything they believed about defeat, dignity, and the meaning of food. Because the next day would not just introduce them to a new meal. It would introduce them to Texas itself. Before sunrise, Tucker stood behind the mess hall, the dark sky still full of stars. The fire in the smoker crackled softly, glowing orange against the metal pit. Post oak logs hissed as they caught flame, sending up sweet, earthy smoke that curled into the cool morning air. Tucker rubbed his hands together for warmth, then reached for the brisket, 14 pounds of beef that would, by sunset, become something unrecognizable even to the most traditional eyes. He seasoned it with nothing more than salt and pepper, pressing the mixture into the thick slab of meat. No fancy spices, no marinades, just fire, time, and patience the way his father taught him in his small smokehouse outside Austin. Once the pit reached the perfect temperature, Tucker lowered the brisket onto the grate and shut the lid with a soft metallic thud. "Do your magic," he muttered. Inside the smoker, the transformation began. Hours passed. Smoke drifted lazily above the yard. Soldiers walking by sniffed the air curiously. A few stopped to peek over Tucker's shoulder. "Smells like heaven, Sarge," one of them said. "It will be," Tucker replied without looking up. By noon, the smell had spread across the entire repatriation center. Nurses paused during rounds. Clerks leaned out windows. Even Morrison stepped outside to inhale the scent, his eyebrows lifting in reluctant approval. Grace arrived last, wrapping her coat tight around her. As she approached the smoker, "Tucker, it smells completely different from yesterday's meal." "That's the point," he said, lifting the lid just long enough for her to see the dark crust forming. "This ain't beef the way they know it. This is Texas on a plate." Grace studied the meat, then nodded. "If anything can bridge two worlds, maybe it's this." Inside the barracks, the women felt the unfamiliar smell before they saw its source. A smoky sweetness floated through the air, drifting in through the open windows. Naomi lifted her head, inhaling deeply. "What is that smell?" she whispered. Leela frowned. "It doesn't smell like beef." "No," Naomi murmured, standing slowly. "It smells like wood, like fired, like..." She stopped, unable to find the right word. Kimiko joined them, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "Perhaps the Americans are preparing something different today." Naomi wasn't sure whether to feel hope or fear, but she knew one thing: whatever was happening outside was not ordinary. By late afternoon, the brisket was ready. Tucker lifted it from the smoker carefully, setting it on a wooden board to rest. When he sliced into it, the knife glided like it was passing through butter. A perfect smoke ring edged each slice. The interior was moist and tender, the exterior dark and crackling. Grace watched in silence. Her mouth parted slightly in awe. "It doesn't look like beef at all," she whispered. "That's what I'm counting on," Tucker said. They arranged the slices neatly on plates with a small cup of barbecue sauce, a slice of white bread, and pickles. Simple, honest, familiar, but utterly foreign to the women who were about to eat it. When the women entered the mess hall, the soldiers didn't crowd them, didn't stare, didn't push. They simply stepped aside, letting the group of weary women approach the tables with quiet dignity. Naomi felt her heart racing. The air smelled warm and smoky, not like the sharp, metallic scent of beef she remembered from Japan's rare meat markets, but something softer, almost comforting. Grace approached holding a plate. "Naomi," she said, offering the dish gently, "this is a Texas specialty, smoked meat. It is not like the beef you saw before." Naomi stared at the slices. They were dark, almost caramel-colored, glistening with juices. This did not resemble the pale roast they had refused. It didn't smell like it, didn't look like it. Kimiko stepped forward, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. "May I try first?" Grace nodded and handed her the plate. Kimiko lifted a single slice between her chopsticks. She sniffed it, her face tightening in concentration. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Then she took a bite. Her eyes widened, not in horror, in surprise. Slowly, deliberately, she chewed again. Then she swallowed and set the chopsticks down. "This," Kimiko said softly, "is not the meat we refused." Grace exhaled in relief. "Do you like it?" Kimiko considered the question for several moments. "It has been transformed, changed. It is no longer what our beliefs prohibit." She took another bite, larger this time. Naomi felt something in her chest unlock, timid hope fluttering inside her. She picked up a slice of brisket, trembling slightly, her nose filled with smoke and sweetness. She tasted it cautiously, her eyes filled with tears, not sadness. Relief, warmth. Home somehow, impossibly inside a foreign land. Across the table, the other women began to eat. Soft murmurs rose, small smiles, quiet laughter. The room softened, warmed, breathed. They were not eating defeat today. They were eating welcome. They were eating humanity. They were eating humanity. They were eating peace. By the end of the meal, Naomi felt lighter than she had in months. She looked across the room and saw Tucker watching from the kitchen door, arms crossed but face softened with satisfaction. Grace approached him. "You did it," she said. "No, ma'am," Tucker replied quietly. "We did it, all of us." And for the first time since the war began, Naomi believed that the world might slowly, painfully, but sincerely be finding its way back to itself. If this story moved you, if it surprised you, or if it reminded you how kindness can cross oceans, cultures, even the wounds of war, then don't leave without taking one simple step. Hit the like button so this piece of forgotten history can reach more people. Subscribe if you want to keep uncovering stories the textbooks never told us, stories of humanity, resilience, and the unexpected ways strangers can change each other's lives. Humanity, resilience, and the unexpected ways strangers can change each other's lives. And now, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Was it the moment the women refused to eat? When Texas barbecue changed everything? Or when the prisoners and the Texans finally understood each other? Your comments help keep these memories alive, not as cold facts, but as human experiences worth remembering. And if you want more stories just like this, stories that show how even in the darkest times, connection is still possible, then make sure you don't miss the next episode. Until then, remember, history isn't just about battles. It's about people, and sometimes, all it takes to change a life is a shared meal.